Okay, Reconstruction and the new microphone and computer and all the horrible woes that are coming with it today on the Miss Meyer Show. So hi guys, I'm Miss Meyer and here's another episode of your Miss Meyer Show. Now, as promised before, I did get a new computer. I have a new everything, but the problem is that after 5 years of having the old computer, I had lots of things set up on it, and now I'm having to reestablish them, and they're not working on this new computer. And so I'm having some issues, especially, mainly, as far as like the microphone goes. So if you are having difficulty hearing me, if I'm breaking out, if the audio is all crumbled, I'm going to speak very slowly, and I'm also going to send you guys, a lot of information that can help you, because I feel guilty that you're not going to be able maybe to hear me. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to use it like this so that hopefully you will be able to hear me and I don't have to wear these horrible things on my head because it's hurting me. Like, it's making my earrings poke into my skin, and that's just horrible. I hate the way that feels. So we are going to review Reconstruction. So like I had said before, Reconstruction is when something is being reconstructed. After Katrina, we reconstructed New Orleans. There's still reconstruction going on. Reconstruction that we're going to be talking about has to do with the Civil War, after the Civil War, how it happened, how they brought things, back, how they reintroduced the South back into the United States. They had broken away. How do they introduce, Southerners back into the South, especially people like Robert E. Lee and, big generals at that time. So the first thing that we're going to discuss, and I have to pull up my thing here that I wanted to review with you guys, because I've been trying desperately to work on this microphone for a very long time. We're going to just talk about the timeline of Reconstruction events. That's basically what we're going to do. Now, Reconstruction, it refers to the time period following the United States Civil War. This is the time, like I said, when the government brought the former Confederate states back into the Union. Now, this period lasted from about 1865 to about 1877, so about 12 years. Okay? Amendments and laws were passed to increase the civil rights and the liberties of African Americans. That was the major thing of Reconstruction, because now that the slaves were freed and they were no longer slaves, what do they do now? Like, it was illegal to teach them to read and write. What are we going to do? Where are they going to go to school? Where are they going to work? How are they going to earn a living? Where are they going to live? They're no longer property, but what are they going to do now? So Reconstruction was a huge thing that really worked very, very hard to help the freed slaves. Now, the former Confederate South, Louisiana, Texas, all those kinds of states, they managed to pass laws that left African Americans segregated and without a voice and power in government until the 1950s and 60s. So even though Reconstruction was about helping out the former slaves, giving them the opportunity to vote and to own property and to go to school, the southern states, some of them were very, very reluctant to change. And they, especially after Reconstruction, the radical Reconstruction ended, they were able to pass laws that kind of segregated everyone and made things very unequal. So let's talk about this timeline first. So the timeline that we're going to talk about, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, the Freedmen's Bureau of 1865, their whole purpose, their entire purpose was to assist the former slaves. The Bureau, it set up schools for African Americans, and it helped set up farms where the former slaves could work. Because remember, these guys were property pretty much. And so their whole lives they spent on plantations working for someone. All of a sudden they're freed, so like, what do they do now? It's kind of like if your parents said, okay, you want to live on your own, you want to be a big kid, go ahead, go. Get out. Well, you don't have, what are you going to do? You don't have a job. Most of you probably don't. You don't have a license. I know most of you don't. You don't have formal education. You don't have a high school diploma. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? What are you going to live? All those things. The former slaves were the same way. Where were they going to go? What's going to become of them? What's going to become of their families? So the Freedmen's Bureau was set up for these freed slaves to be able to find places to work, to find places to live. It helped them set up schools. It helped them set up jobs and places where they could learn to read and write and do simple, academic stuff that they just were never able to do. The 13th Amendment of 1865 abolished slavery in the United States. Now, this is known as one of the Reconstruction Amendments, which extended rights to former slaves after the Civil War. This freed all of the slaves. Do you remember the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln put into place only freed the slaves in the southern states? It did not free the slaves in the border states. And he said he wasn't going to do that because he didn't want the border states to get angry at him and to join the Confederacy. The border states were pretty neutral, with half liking the Confederacy, half liking the Union. And Lincoln was really, really, really fearful that if he freed all the slaves in all the states, that those border states would go against him and join the Confederacy. So he didn't do that. Well, after the Civil War, Lincoln and Congress, well, Lincoln was pretty much, he was, dead at this point, but the 13th Amendment freed the slaves in all of the states, north, south, middle, everywhere. Slavery was completely illegal. It said no more slavery anywhere. Not in the territories, not in the states, not anywhere. And that's the 13th Amendment. Next is the Black Codes. And these, let me pick this piece of gum out of my mouth, guys. This is so gross. Hold on. You heard me go. I was just really spitting it out. I'm sorry. I know. It's getting in my way of talking. Okay, so the Black Codes of 1865 and through 1868. So what these were a series of laws that were passed by the ex-Confederate states. Like I said before, even though they were free, the African, the former slaves, they were now free. The southern states were very reluctant to change. They didn't want anybody telling them what to do and how to change, to do all these things. They didn't like all this change. So they passed a series of laws, and these laws restricted the rights of African Americans in the South. It included segregation in public spaces, meaning there was a white water fountain and a black water fountain. There was a white school and a black school, and a white bus and a black bus. For those, there was lots of segregation with the Black Codes. It also put restrictions on African Americans' rights to be free laborers, saying in order to work, they would have to have permits and licenses and things that were very, very difficult for them to get because they were never allowed to be educated before now. And in order to get a license or some sort of permit, they would have to be able to read, they would have to be able to write their name, and they didn't know, a lot of them didn't know how to do that. So in the South, these Black Codes really, really inhibited the freed slaves' ability to actually be free. It also really restricted the rights of the freed slaves to own land, to own their own homes, and to testify in court. It made it very, very difficult for them to do these things. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, when they saw this was going on, they tried to kind of, fix it, but the South was very, very reluctant, like I said, to change. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 granted African Americans citizenship, and it gave them the right to make contracts, to sue, and to own property. So it basically gave them all the rights that, white men had before then. Still, women and Native Americans did not have these rights. So all men, unless they were a Native American, were now given the right and the title of a citizen. Well, the Black Codes were so enforced in the South that even though the freed slaves had the opportunity now to own property, to vote, to make contracts, and to work and all those kinds of things, the Black Codes made it very difficult because they would put restrictions on it. And say, okay, yeah, you can own this property, but you have to be able to sign your name. Well, they were never, a lot of people didn't know how. They didn't. They would just make a mark. And so they really, really, made it difficult that way. The Reconstruction Acts of 1867 divided the former Confederate states into 5 military districts with the exception of Tennessee. Now, when the states left the Union, they formed their own country, the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. Well, now that they wanted to come back into the United States, we needed to find a way to let them come back in. Well, we talked about it last time. I don't know if we talked about it very much in detail because I was having issues with the camera. Remember last time? Well, Lincoln and Johnson had very different views on allowing the southern states back into the Union. Lincoln was kind of lenient. He was, the 10% plan. As long as 10% swear their allegiance to the Union, they would allow back into the Union. Generals would have to do a little bit extra stuff, but it wasn't very intense. Well, the Reconstruction Act was put into place after Lincoln was assassinated, and it was basically much more of a punishment to the southern states. They basically had to kind of make up for it. They had to prove that they were loyal enough to come back into the United States. Like my daughter, one of her duties, her chores, is to empty out the litter box. Kind of started when I was pregnant for Vivian and I wasn't able to do it, and we kept making her do it because it's one less thing I've got to do. So her chore is to empty out the litter box. Well, she forgot to empty out the litter box for like a week, and it was pretty bad, as you can imagine, because I rarely go upstairs because I'm very lazy. And so I'll go hang out down here, and if I need something, I tell them to throw it over the banister so I don't have to go upstairs. Well, we went upstairs to check, upstairs, and the litter box was pretty intense. And so, what got taken away from you when you didn't clean the litter box? Your phone, her phone, which is nicer than mine. Let me show you this, guys. Come here, you. It's my phone. This Mama. Mama's got this phone. Daughter's phone. Huh? Yeah. Okay. That's a nice mom. So we took away her phone, and she had to prove that she was, ready to get it back. She had to prove it. She had to be able to go and she clean the litter box, make sure it was nice and clean, and the bathroom wasn't a disaster, because that was pretty bad too. So the same thing was going on with the South. The South had to prove it as well. They had to prove that they were willing and able to come back into the Union. And one of the things that they did in order to make sure that they did that, and like I went, well, not maybe, because I'm so lazy, I don't want to go upstairs. So my husband, Mr. Meyer, will go upstairs and check to make sure the litter box is nice and clean, because I just won't. And so the southern states, the same way that we're checking on Isabel, making sure she's doing her chores, the southern states were being checked on, and they were being checked on by the North. And the way that they checked on them was to put them into these military districts. So there was not Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, all this was, there was still obviously the states, but instead of being an actual state and being classified as a state, they were, for the time being, just a military district, all with the exception of Tennessee. Okay, all with that. So Tennessee was not included because they already ratified the 14th Amendment. They weren't going to fight anymore. Tennessee was more like a border state. They weren't very southern, like, some of the deep southern states, like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. These are the deep southern states. So Tennessee was very willing to just, let's get over with it. Let's just get it over. Let's ratify the amendment, get back into the Union, and let's get things going the way they should be going. Let's not worry about anything else. So when they divided these southern states into these military districts, Tennessee had already done what they had asked them and said, okay, we're not going to punish you, Tennessee. We're going to punish everybody else. So a general was in charge of each military district. Now, that really irritated the South because it was a Northern general who was in charge of these Southern states. Well, Louisiana was just extremely livid, especially the guy that we had. His name was Bill Bullock, and they called him the Beast because, where's my beast? My stinky beast. I don't know where he is. I'm not going to call him either because he can barely walk. He's not going to come in here. But anyways, they called him the Beast, Butler. That's what his name. Okay, when I said Bueller, it's Butler. His last name was Butler. Anyways, he was really intense with the people of New Orleans. He put curfews on them. He told them they couldn't drink on, certain days of the week. And Louisiana was a port city, and they had lots and lots of whiskey and lots of things that, fun and things that they like to do. And here comes Butler, and he says, no, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that, you're not going to do this. Well, the people in New Orleans despised him. And y'all remember what the ladies of New Orleans did with the pictures of people that they despised? That's right, they put the picture in the chamber pots. Chamber pots were their toilets. They would put a picture of that person at the bottom of their toilets, and they'd go to the bathroom on him. That was pretty intense. And when the Northern soldiers, because also soldiers would come and occupy that Southern state. So Louisiana not only had Butler, who was making sure, the general in charge, they also had Northern soldiers parading around Louisiana and making sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Well, the ladies of New Orleans took it upon themselves once again, and so they started to empty their chamber pots whenever they would see a Northern soldier walking underneath their house, because they usually had, especially up in like the quarters and stuff, they would have like they would live and they would have like balconies and stuff. They would just throw it out in the street. True story. All right. So these, like I said, the general was in charge of each military district, and soldiers occupied the states. So other Reconstruction acts included barring Confederate leaders from voting or holding office. They made the Confederate states ratify the 14th Amendment, and these were all things that they had to do before being readmitted back into the United States. Well, the 14th Amendment of 1868 was passed in 1866 and ratified in 1868. And this said that all people born in the United States, except Native Americans, were now considered United States citizens. All people, men, women, children, as long as you weren't a Native American, you were now considered to be an American citizen. If you were Native American, you were not an American citizen, which is kind of crazy because they were here first before a lot of these other people. So I don't know. I don't understand it either. Okay. Okay, that was the 14th Amendment. I'm just confusing myself. That was the 14th Amendment. The Tenure of Office Act and Johnson's impeachment of 1868. So President Andrew Johnson, he was the one that was in charge after Lincoln was assassinated. So he was actually impeached. 2 presidents in the entire history of the United States have been impeached. One was Andrew Johnson, and the other one was William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton. Lots of people misconstrue and say that Richard Nixon was also impeached, but he was not because he resigned from office before being impeached. So it was Johnson and Clinton. Well, Johnson was impeached after removing the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, from office without the approval of Congress. So he didn't really care for Stanton, and Stanton was appointed by one of Johnson's rivals, and it was kind of like a last-minute thing. So Johnson said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm the president. I'm not going to let you serve in the Senate. And Edwin Stanton said, well, you can't do that. You've got to get approval from Congress. You can't just do that because there's the separation of powers, the checks and balances. And before the president could make a big decision like that, he had to get approval of Congress. Remember, Thomas Jefferson didn't get approval of Congress when they bought the Louisiana Purchase, and they kind of just said, oh, well, whatever. But now they were not going to let that slide, so they were going to impeach him, which means bring up criminal charges against. So this was in violation of the Tenure of Office Act, which had been passed in 1867. And like I said, an impeachment is to bring criminal charges against the president. Bill Clinton's impeachment charge was that he lied under oath. Okay, that's what his charge was. Johnson was that he violated the Tenure of Office Act. Now, this act was passed in 1867, and it said that you could not eliminate someone or remove them from their job or refuse to give them their seat without the approval of Congress, and that's what Johnson did not have. So Johnson faced a trial in the Senate, and he was one vote short of being convicted, and meaning being put into jail, but he was still removed from office. So with Bill Clinton's impeachment, he was convicted. They did say, yes, they found him guilty, but he was not removed from office. Johnson was not convicted, but was removed from office. So that's where it gets a little crazy, but just remember that it's good trivia. The two presidents who were impeached who are the two presidents who were impeached, Larry? You know? You just heard me. That's why he doesn't really know. Look, he said Johnson and Nixon. He heard me. I don't give him credit for that. Okay, who replaced Nixon? His assistant? These people know nothing about history. I'm serious. I am the only history person in this whole house. Beast probably knows only history in this house like me. That's it. Just me and Beast. I guarantee nobody else does. Huh? It's hard being the smartest smartest person in your family. All right. So next we're going to talk about the 15th Amendment. So these amendments are crazy and they get you a little mixed up. This is an important thing to remember. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment gave them citizenship, gave all people citizenship except for the Native Americans. The 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. It said that no citizen of the U.S. can be denied the right to vote based on race or color. It did not say gender. That didn't come along until the 1920s with the 19th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment freed the slaves. 14th Amendment gave all people born in the United States citizenship, said they were citizens. The 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. Not women, not Native Americans. Okay? Election of 1876 and the Compromise of 1877. So in 1876, in the presidential election, Democrat Samuel Tilden, he won the majority of the popular vote. But there was a dispute over who won the electoral vote. We talked about that a little bit, and we'll go over it even more later on, especially now that we're getting into election year. But we're not going to go over it too much right now. So a committee decided that Republican Rutherford B. Hayes won those electoral votes, which was crazy because he really wasn't one of the big winners, big names at all. And he was elected president. Now, the Democrats said that they would accept Hayes as their president if the federal troops would be removed from the South. If they refused to remove these troops from the South, then they were going to create a big stink, and they were going to have to do the election over and all these other kind of things that they didn't want to have to do. So the North and the Republicans at the time said, you know what, fine. We will remove them from the South, and Hayes is going to be our president. You realize our country at this time has gone through so much turmoil. We had gone through a war and Reconstruction and trying to rebuild things. So they didn't want to have to slow things down anymore. So when the Democrats said that they would accept Hayes if they did, one thing, the Republicans said, sounds like a plan, let's do it. The problem is that once they removed the soldiers from the South, things started to change. Whereas before they were making progress, we started to see a lot more freedoms, a lot more, freedoms, and I don't know what other word I want to use. I guess rights. There we go. Rights, lots of rights and freedoms that were given to the freed slaves, where now you're going to see them start to be taken away. Okay? Next, that's how we're going to talk about the Jim Crow laws. So these laws were laws that segregated blacks and whites. That's when you hear the word Jim Crow law. It's a law that segregates blacks and whites. They began to appear after Reconstruction ended, once the Northern troops were removed out of the South. Now, these laws forced black people to sit on separate areas of trains, different schools, different, water fountains, different buses, different everything. And these didn't end until really the 1950s and 60s with Dr. King around that time. The Grandfather Clause of 1865 was something that I can't imagine that it was even in place because it's so preposterous. The Grandfather Clause, now you see, like, the 15th Amendment gave the slaves, the men, the right to vote, the freed slaves the right to vote. Well, the Grandfather Clause was added to many states, southern states, voting laws, and it said that you could only vote if your grandfather voted. Well, these people, a lot of these former slaves were just freed, and their grandfathers were slaves, so they did not vote. So they couldn't vote. They couldn't vote because they said, our grandfathers were slaves. How are we going to vote? And they said, I guess you can't vote. Well, the southern states were told they couldn't do that, so then they started to put in something called the literacy test and the poll tax, which meant you could only vote if you could read. And you could only vote if you could pay a tax at the time that you voted. Well, not only did this, prevent a lot of the former slaves from voting, but it also prevented a lot of poor white men from voting as well. So that left in the South, the only people who were voting were your rich white men, because the former slaves, most of the former slaves, and all of the poor white men, they couldn't pay the tax, and a lot of them didn't even know how to read still, whites as well as blacks. So these things really were Jim Crow laws, they really prevented progress, especially in the South. Some of these terms I want to go over with you guys, and they're really, really important, especially as we move forward into, I guess, really for you guys for next year when you start American history in I believe it might be 9th. No, I think it's 10th grade. I think it's 10th grade. I'm not sure. I think it's 10th grade. Okay, because that's when you start talking about Reconstruction through present day, which is really interesting. I like teaching that as well, but I'm not going to be your teacher. I know you're sad about that, right? Okay, so these are just some important terms. The first one is carpetbagger. Now, I love this term, and I guess it's because of my love for, I don't know if I've ever told you guys this, but my favorite movie is Gone with the Wind. My first introduction at the term carpetbagger was through Gone with the Wind, and these were kind of like Northerners who came to the South during the Reconstruction period. They tried to get rich, kind of like after Katrina. When we were trying, when everybody was trying to rebuild in New Orleans and in Chalmette, you had all these construction companies where there were maybe like 5 or 6 in Chalmette before, but after Katrina, you had dozens. They were everywhere, and they were all from up north, and they were coming down here to Louisiana, to Chalmette, to try and make some money because everybody needed to rebuild. Well, that was the same thing that was going on in the South. Everybody needed to rebuild. Everybody needed everything. Because remember what Sherman did? He burned his way through. So these carpetbaggers, they would come and they would have bags that were literally made of carpet. And they would put all of their belongings into these bags. And they would stroll around the South and they would try to make money. They open up stores, sell lumber, do whatever. That's what they did. So most of them were interested in making money. Most of them. But some really wanted to help the newly freed slaves. So some of them did have very good intentions, but most of them were coming here to make it rich, Next one is a term which I know you all have heard. Sadly, it is very infamous in the state of Louisiana. It's the term the Ku Klux Klan, or Ku Klux Klan. I always say Ku, but it's Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was a group of white supremacists who wanted to keep white control of the South and did not want African Americans to vote or to hold office. And their method of preventing this was to scare people. They dressed in white because they wanted to appear as ghosts, and they basically would do horrendous acts of violence against not only the freed slaves and the African Americans, but also, you know, the white people that were trying to help them and for progressive movements. So the Klan was responsible for a ton of violence, a ton of murders, all the way up until, gosh, like the 60s and even in the 70s, and even sometimes today you'll hear of something having to deal with the Ku Klux Klan. So eventually, you know, so at first, many Southerners approved of the Klan's actions. They said, oh, yeah, we agree with you, we agree with you. But then they started to see the violence escalate into something that was totally not acceptable. Men and women were hanged from trees, disemboweled, meaning their intestines were cut out of their body. They were ravaged by dogs, burned at the stake. Children were killed. I mean, there was a lot of things, I mean, just really, really intense. And so the Klan's actions really started to have a backlash. Southerners started to blame the Ku Klux Klan for the continued presence of the Northern troops, because when the activity of the Klan would get crazily out of hand, the North would send in more troops. And the Southern people were saying, we don't want them here, and it's your fault that they're here. So originally, the Klan was having all this support from the Southern people, but when they saw just how horrendous what they were doing, they said, no, we don't want to have anything with that. And that's why they're a secret organization, even today. That's not like publicized saying, hey, I'm, you know, whatever. But, you know, it's a sad part of our history. Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta keep talking into the mic. Keep forgetting, and my arms are getting tired. All right, so we've got two more things I want to go. A couple of things. But I'm gonna go through them quickly. All right, radical Republicans. So these are the group of Republicans who supported punishing the Confederate States. So some of them wanted the Confederate States to come into the Union peacefully, just to have it. Let's get back to the way things used to be. But the radical Republicans were much more intense on punishing them. Kind of like me, okay? I'm the nice parent. Belle, am I the nice parent? I am the nice parent. Like when they get punished, I'm always the one that says, oh, don't worry about it. You'll whatever. Don't listen to your father. Whatever. I shouldn't say that because he's gonna come in here and be like, I knew you told them that. But I'm much more easygoing. I'm kind of like, oh well, you know, like Vivian will beat on her sisters or throw something at them. I'm like, just say you're sorry. Okay, go back and play. And my husband, he'll put them in timeout. He'll take away electronics. He'll punish them. They'll have to do this. They're punished from all this other kind of stuff. So I was much more like, you know, your regular Republican, and my husband would have been the radical Republican, the one that really wanted to punish the South. The radical Republicans wanted to force the majority of white males in the Confederate States to take an oath to the United States and to exclude anyone who had served in the Confederate Army or government from participating in the new government. Well, that would have created a problem because most everyone either served or was in the government in the Confederate States. So that would have been a little bit of a problem. Radical Republicans also wanted to take away land from Southern plantation owners and distribute it to the newly freed slaves. Well, you can imagine just how well that went over in the Southern states. They were like, oh, no way, you can't do that. And, you know, and it also really affected people that did not agree with slavery in the Southern states because not every single person that was in the South agreed with slavery. And by doing that, you were not just punishing these big slave plantation owners, you were punishing everyone, you know, no matter what. That's kind of like when the teacher, you know, when you guys maybe went to brick and mortar school. I know I've done it too. It's sad, but teacher is a necessity of the teacher. And like the teacher will hear talking in the background say, you're all punished and no one has recess. So you're punishing everybody, including the kid that was in the back just being real quiet and doing his work. Well, the same thing is going on with the radical Republicans who said, oh, well, you're all punished. Everybody's punished. I'm going to teach you all a lesson. Well, that, you know, it didn't work very well. It doesn't work in the classroom, and it didn't work in here either. Representative Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania was one of the leaders of the Radical Republicans, and that's just a name that you're going to hear a lot more the deeper you get into studying American history. Thaddeus Stevens, which is such a cool name, for real. All right, next is presidential reconstruction. Now, these were the policies that were favored by Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson in allowing the Confederate States back into the Union. Now, Johnson wished to pardon anyone in the Confederacy who swore an oath of loyalty to the United States, because Johnson knew that if they did what the Radical Republicans did, then they would have no one participate from the South, because every male of able body was in the army or you were in the government some way or another. There were no able-bodied men, you know, who were just sitting around not, oh, I don't want to get involved. They were all involved, okay? So Johnson wished to pardon anyone who swore to the oath. His policies were much more lenient than those of the Radical Republicans. So I am presidential Reconstruction when it comes to my children, and my husband is Radical Republican Reconstruction when it comes to our children. He just is. He's the dad. You know, that's just the way it is. Except in my house, it's the mom. When I was growing up, my mom was so much more strict than my dad. Oh my gosh. I mean, she might be little, but she's small but mighty. She don't know anything about history, but she was small but mighty, I'm telling you. All right, next ones are scalawags. Now, a scalawag is a Southern white person who helped the Reconstruction effort. They viewed them, a lot of Southerners viewed these people as traitors to the South. You know, like you're a scalawag, you're a traitor to the South. But, you know, like I say, hey, we're all Saints fans, right? We are all living, we love the Saints, except for some of you who tell me, no, I don't like the Saints. I like the Cowboys. Or I like whoever, whatever. You know, that's like a traitor. We consider you a traitor. So you're kind of like a scalawag, okay? Think of it that way. You know, my daughter, I have 3 daughters, so every time I talk about my kids, I'm going to say my daughter. But my mom, she said, hey, I'm coming up for Halloween, and her birthday is in November, like right after Halloween. Said, do you want a Saints jersey? And she said, oh no, I don't want a Saints jersey. No one wears those at my school. I would take a Cowboys jersey. I said, don't get her anything, because I'm throwing her out of my house. You know, like she's no longer welcome to live here, so you don't need to worry about it. But, you know, obviously I'm not going to throw her out of my house. Although I can't believe it, you know, and today, y'all, I'm recording this today. I'm recording it before the Saints game. I'm recording it at 2:57. The Saints game comes on tonight at 7:30. Cowboys versus Saints. Let's win! I know, right? I'm like really, 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 really hoping for a win. Especially, I live in Dallas, guys. What's going to happen? Everybody on my street, they're all a bunch of Dallas flags, except for next door neighbor. He is a Saints fan because he's from Lake Charles. But everybody else, they're all about their Dallas stuff. And it's just like, whatever. We say who dat in my house. Anyway, all right. Sharecropper. And then one more thing, and then we're gone. Okay, we're going to talk about sharecroppers, Solid South, and the Union League. Really quickly. All right. A sharecropper is a person who grew crops on land owned by someone else. So it's kind of like renting, okay? Like you're renting something. You're growing land, you're growing food on their land, and in return, they let you live there and they let you pay off their debt. So, like, okay, for example, the house that I'm in right now, that I'm living in, I rent this house because I didn't know where we were going to live. I mean, we had to come here really quickly, and we didn't know if we wanted to stay in this area, so we just rented the house. So we rent it, we pay rent to there's a company that owns these houses. Nobody owns this, like this big conglomerate or whatever, I don't know. So I am paying money to them, and in return, I'm taking care of their house and making sure that everything's nice and all that kind of good stuff. And they're letting me live here. Well, that's kind of what a sharecropper was. They grew crops on a person's land, and they gave those crops, a share of those crops, majority of those crops, to the landowner, And in return, the landowner would let them live on their land. Now, this helped a ton of freed slaves because they had no home. They had no home to buy and to go live. After, slavery was abolished and the war was over, where were they going to go? They were someone's property from the moment they drew their first breath. So where were they going to go? And the sharecropping situation gave them an opportunity to have a home, but it also kind of put them into the bonds of slavery once again, where they were never able to leave. A lot of times in these southern big plantations where they did sharecropping, they felt that they were never able to leave because their debts were always racking higher and higher. Oh, well, you need more food? Okay, well, you're going to have to work for me for 2 more years. Oh, you need heat in your house or wood for your fire? Okay, that's 3 more months of working. So they felt like they were never really able to get out of that cycle. And this wasn't just for the freed slaves. It was also for the poor whites as well. Solid South were the states of the southern U.S. that traditionally supported the Democratic Party after the Civil War. These were your southern hardcore Democrats that were so against all of the Reconstruction plans, like all of them. By 1876, only 3 southern states remained the solid South. And these are the people that just would not give up. I mean, they were just ridiculous. They didn't care that the war was over. The war was never over in their eyes. And believe it or not, guess who? Guess which state was part of this? Yes, Louisiana. It was 3 states, Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. And that's why South Carolina and Louisiana are deeply southern even till this day. South Carolina for sure, but it's gorgeous there, guys. If I could live anywhere else, I mean, if my husband ever gets transferred again, I don't see that happening, and it definitely won't be to South Carolina, but I would go to South Carolina because it's gorgeous. Gorgeous. All right, now, last one. The Union Leagues. Now, these originally started in the North to support the Union's war effort. The Union Leagues in the South did come down here, and their whole purpose was to help former slaves register to vote, and not only to vote, but to vote. Ooh, see that I just spit all over my computer. Sorry. I'm wiping it down. My new computer. It helped them not only register to vote, but to vote Republican. You see, the Democrats at this time, these were your people that wanted the South to stay the way it was, to not have all of these newfangled amendments come into place and all those kinds of things. They wanted things to remain the same. The Republicans were the ones that were saying, oh, we want to change things. We don't want we want everyone to have the right to vote, and we want everyone to be considered a citizen as long as you were a man and not a Native American. So the Union League's purpose was to help the former slaves vote and to help them vote Republican. So it was really there to help further the cause of the Republican Party was the main reason for it. All right, guys, I appreciate your patience. I really, really, really apologize if the quality of the microphone is not acceptable. I do blame my husband because he bought me this headset. I said, just get me a headset. I don't care what it looks like. And that's the one he got me, which is really a good headset. But I look like I don't like it on. It feels like I'm an airline operator. Operator, hello? All right, so that's all I've got for you guys. I hope you have a fabulous rest of the week. And go Saints! Woohoo! At 7:30.